The man who built the moat. Why the world's most valuable CEO got rattled by a 25-year-old, and what that tells you about the next 20 years of computing. This is not financial advice. This is how I am thinking about the single most important argument happening in technology right now. One most people watched and completely misread. Let me start with a scene. Not long ago, in the studio of the hottest tech podcast in Silicon Valley, Jensen Huang, the man who runs the most valuable company on Earth, a company whose market cap had just crossed $5 trillion, raised his voice. He pointed at the camera and at the young man across from him, more than 30 years his junior, and said one word at a time, "I cannot accept that kind of loser mentality." He was still in the signature black leather jacket, but the eyes were not the smiling, genial leather jacket Jensen the world is used to. He looked like a man who'd just been jabbed, in public, in a place that actually hurt. Think about what you're looking at, the CEO of a $5 trillion company, a valuation now larger than the entire annual output of Germany, bigger than Japan, bigger than the UK. In American tech, there is arguably no one more powerful. And this man is getting visibly worked up by a 25-year-old. The strange part, the kid never raised his voice, not once. He just sat there, calm, deadly serious, asking one question after another, each one aimed at the most sensitive spot Nvidia has. Over an hour and 43 minutes you can watch Jensen change. He opens warm, almost grandfatherly. By the middle, he's tightening up. By the end, he is, at moments, struggling to keep his composure. So who is this kid, and what did he ask that could push one of the richest men alive, on the turf he knows better than anyone, to the edge? His name is Dwarkesh Patel, 25, Indian-American, born in 2000, came to the US at 8 with his father, a doctor, studied computer science at UT Austin. On paper, the most ordinary engineering kid imaginable, and yet The Economist called him someone who went from a complete unknown to the most sought-after tech podcast host in Silicon Valley. The New Yorker called his show the Joe Rogan of the AI world. Here's what makes him dangerous. He does his homework like almost no one else. Before a guest, he reads everything, every public statement, every earnings call, every paper, every old interview. Then he goes further. He calls up other experts and asks them to hand him the strongest counter-arguments. He builds a list. Before Jensen, he went to Dylan Patel at Semi-Analysis, the analyst Wall Street treats as the closest thing to a man who understands Nvidia's supply chain from the inside. Same last name, no relation. The point is, Dwarkesh didn't show up to hear a product pitch. He showed up to run an ambush, and the angles were brutal. He skipped the soft stuff. Will AI destroy humanity? When does AGI arrive? He went straight at the supply chain, straight at the question Wall Street is quietly betting billions on. How much of Nvidia's moat is actually water? And one thing tells you this wasn't just one kid's opinion. After it aired, Michael Burry, yes, that Burry, the man The Big Short was built around, currently short Nvidia, went public saying every Nvidia bull needs to watch this. His words for Jensen's performance. He squirmed and obfuscated. So when you watch Jensen get uncomfortable, understand he wasn't being needled by a hobbyist. He was being cross-examined by the entire bear case, with a 25-year-old holding the file. So let's open the file. Dwarkesh came in with 4 bets, 4 theses the smartest short sellers are using right now to argue Nvidia's castle is about to flood. The first one, commoditization. He opened with a knife. AI, he said, is commoditizing software companies, and when something becomes a commodity, it stops being special and you can't charge a premium. We've watched software stocks crater on exactly that fear. Once AI writes the code isn't worth what it used to be. Then he turned it on Nvidia. Isn't Nvidia fundamentally a software company? You design the chips, you send the blueprints to TSMC, they build the logic, stack the HBM, the high-bandwidth memory AI needs, made by SK Hynix and Micron, and ship it to assembly in Taiwan. Nvidia itself manufactures nothing. So if software gets commoditized, won't Nvidia? One piece of background. Nvidia runs what the industry calls a fabless model. We don't own the wafer plants. We keep the architecture, the system integration, the networking, the software stack, the ecosystem. We outsource the making to TSC. Dwarkesh's question sits right on top of that. If you've handed off the making, where exactly is the part of you that can't be replaced? Jensen didn't flinch. He smiled, then said, the input is electrons, the output is tokens, and in the middle, that's us. Electrons, the power from your plants. Tokens, the pieces a model spits out. Every word and fragment of code that pops out one at a time when you chat with an AI. Nvidia's actual job, he's saying, is to build the machine that turns electricity into language, and that conversion is one of the genuinely hardest things in the world. Then a line that holds 30 years of company philosophy in one sentence. We do as much as we should and as little as we shouldn't. What others can do, TSMC, SK Hynix, Foxconn, let them, make them my ecosystem. What others cannot do, we fight to the death for, at any cost. The second bet, the supply chain. This is where Dwarkesh showed his real cards. His thesis, Nvidia hasn't just bought from the supply chain, it's locked it. TSMC's leading-edge capacity, the HBM, and CoWoS packaging, the advanced glue, that bonds chips and memory, which TSMC effectively owns. Lock it all down and competitors can't even find a supplier. How much? Nvidia's own 10 discloses purchase and capacity commitments of roughly $95 billion. Call it $100 billion, the official figure. But Dwarkesh, citing semi-analysis, said if you count the broader chain, the real number may be closer to $250 billion. His read, this is the moat. You're playing a supply chain game. Jensen reframed the whole thing. What you're describing, he said, is the visible part. There's a huge amount of invisible commitment, investment my suppliers make on their own initiative for me. Dwarkesh's eyes widened. What do you mean on their own initiative? And here Jensen explained the actual core of the interview. I go to TSMC, to Hynix, to Micron, one by one, and I tell them, let me show you how big this industry will be. Let me walk through the math with you. You see what's happening. He isn't doing a negotiation. He's running an industry-wide education campaign, playing teacher to the entire supply chain. GTC, the annual conference with tens of thousands of attendees. You think that's about launching products? The real purpose is to drag everyone up and down the chain, the makers of wafers, memory, power systems, fiber, liquid cooling, into one room so they can see each other, validate each other, and find the courage to invest. And why do they invest for him and not others? Because they know he can buy their capacity and sell it through his downstream. So what you're looking at is not CUDA code, not a GPU architecture, not a $95 billion contract. It's Jensen Huang, one man who spent 30 unbroken years at the center of this industry. He functions like a godfather of the trade, arms around the whole thing. TSMC has worked with him for 30 years without a signed legal contract. No contract, but trust. And that trust you could not buy back for $100 billion. Plainly, Jensen Huang himself is the most critical engineer in this moat, which raises the biggest risk hanging over the company, the one I'll come back to at the end. What happens to the moat when Jensen retires? When I heard him describe going CEO to CEO, it reminded me of Chip War by the historian Chris Miller. One idea runs through that whole book. In Semiconductors, going back to the 1960s, the real moat has never been how good any single chip is. It's the industrial organization built over decades, companies investing in each other, lashed together on the same ship. Take ASML, the Dutch company that makes the lithography machines. EUV lithography is the magic required for today's most advanced chips, the 5 and 3 nanometer parts. Only one company on Earth can do it. But it wasn't built by one firm gritting its teeth. The technology was in development since the 1990s. The first commercial machine didn't ship until around 2018. Nearly 30 years, billions in R&D. No single company could afford it alone. So in 2012, ASML pulled off something beautiful. It brought its 3 largest customers, Intel, TSMC, Samsung, in as shareholders and co-investors. Together, they committed roughly 1.4 billion euros in R&D funding, plus around 85 billion euros in equity. Intel alone took a stake worth billions for about 15% of the company. Read that again. This is not a supplier chasing customers. This is the customers putting up the money, taking the equity, making a multi-decade commitment just to beg this company to please hurry up and build the machine that you cannot buy with money alone. So when Jensen says, we do as much as we should, translate it. We let others do the making, but only because I've been married into this industry for 30 years. He wasn't bluffing. He was describing the rules this business has run on since the 1960s. The third bet. Dwarkesh saw the supply chain question hadn't landed a knockout, so he went after the software. 60% of your revenue, he said, comes from the 5 biggest clouds: Amazon, Microsoft, Google, Meta, Oracle. They have money, talent, depth. They write their own low-level code now. OpenAI even built a tool to route around your CUDA. For your biggest customers, is CUDA actually still useful? This hits a nerve. CUDA is a language system Nvidia has spent 20 years building, the language every AI researcher and programmer has to speak to make a GPU work. It's Nvidia's single biggest piece of soft power. If even the largest customers route around it, what's left? Jensen answered with a metaphor. A CPU is a Cadillac, comfortable luxury sedan. Anyone can drive it. The Nvidia GPU is a Formula One car. Anyone can take it to 100 miles an hour. But to push it to the limit, 180, 200, 300, you need a team of professional engineers. Sure, those hyperscalers can write a kernel. But to write the kernel that wrings out every last drop, they can't. Nvidia's engineers go in and double or triple it for them. The number of engineers we embed in these labs is staggering, he said. They walk in, and the customer's model often gets 2 to 3 times faster. A 2x means the same pile of cards produces double the revenue. Real money on the table. Then he threw down a challenge. He named Inference Max, Dylan's public benchmark, and said the TPU camp won't come compete. MLPerf, the most authoritative benchmark, they won't show either. I invite them, he said. Put your 40% cheaper, 5 times the value, claims out in the open, not one dared. It's cocky, openly provocative, but the substance is real. From Hopper to Blackwell, transistor count rose only 75% in 3 years, but performance went up 50 times. Where did the other 49-fold come from? CUDA, the architecture, the algorithms, the engineers tuning by hand. An ASIC can't do that. A TPU can't do that. Then the margin question. Your gross margin is 71%, Dwarkesh said. Isn't the whole reason others build their own chips just to route around you and save money? Save what? Jensen said. An ASIC's gross margin is also around 65%. Their margins are within a few points of mine. And then, go find me anywhere in the world an ASIC team you can bet your life on. One that ships you a new chip every year, costs down hard every year. Can you? He can. This year Rubin, next year Rubin Ultra, the year after that, the one after. Each on time, like clockwork. That's the most hidden mode of all, cadence. And from one card to $100 billion order, he takes it all. There is not, he said, a second company on the planet that can do that. Just as he hit his stride, Dwarkesh changed the subject, and for the first time Jensen's face went heavy. Anthropic just announced a multi-gigawatt TPU deal with Google and Broadcom, he said. Google's own Gemini, a top 3 model, was trained on TPUs. The 2 biggest new compute orders didn't land with you. Jensen didn't dodge. And here's what almost no multi-trillion-dollar CEO does on camera. He admitted he was wrong. That was my mistake, he said. Sit with that, he explained. At the time, I didn't grasp that getting a foundation model company like Anthropic or OpenAI off the ground would need suppliers to put in tens of billions directly. I figured they'd raise from VCs. I didn't realize this scale is beyond what VCs can do. The only players who can are the giants with their own chips, Google and Amazon. So when Anthropic came to me, I didn't catch them. They signed exclusive deals with Google and Amazon instead. But he won't make the same mistake again. And here, let me give you the verified numbers, because this is exactly the kind of figure that gets garbled in retelling. Nvidia's stake in OpenAI landed at $30 billion, down from a maximum it once floated of $100 billion, finalized inside OpenAI's $110 billion round. Its commitment to Anthropic was up to $10 billion. So, the real shape, 30 into OpenAI, up to 10 into Anthropic. Still staggering, $30 billion alone is more than most public companies earn in revenue in a year. His framing, the world needs OpenAIs to exist. The world needs Anthropic to exist. I want them to exist, so let me help make them big. That's Jensen doing remedial homework, using cash to buy back the piece of the puzzle he dropped. And underneath it, the deeper change. The game has shifted from I sell chips, you buy them, to a 3-way entanglement. Suppliers put up capital. Clouds lock in the customer. Model companies commit to long-term buying. It's the deepest restructuring of the business model the AI industry has seen. Then Dwarkesh threw another sharp one, and credit to him, not one of his questions was easy. Your GPUs have been short 2 years, he said. Everyone's fighting over them, but you don't allocate highest bidder wins. These neocloud startups, rumor is you're propping them up. Are you fragmenting the market on purpose? Jensen swatted it. Your premise is wrong. We're first come, first served. If you don't place the order, 1,000 words won't matter. Why not allocate by who pays most? Because that's how bad businesses operate. I set the price. You buy or you don't. I never want to be the supplier who hikes the moment demand spikes. I want to be the supplier you order from with your eyes closed. Sounds like a moral posture, but the calculation is underneath. A fixed price, no opportunistic hikes, trains the whole industry into a habit. Order, and you'll never get gouged. And when your margin is already 70%, how much more were you hiking anyway? He also cleared up an old rumor in passing that Larry Ellison of Oracle and Elon Musk once begged him for GPUs over dinner. We had dinner. It was pleasant, but they never begged, he said. They just placed orders. Then he reached for the origin story. In 1993, when Nvidia was founded, 60 companies competed in 3D graphics. One survived, Nvidia. And if you'd ranked those 60 by likelihood of survival, Nvidia would have been near the bottom. Its early architecture was wrong from the root, and developers couldn't support it. So even then, Jensen understood something better than anyone. You can't tell who'll win, so don't pick winners. Either let them fend for themselves or help everyone. That's his investment philosophy. He doesn't pick winners, he invests in the whole chain, which of course he can afford to do. It's worth pausing on what one independent analyst, a Silicon Valley writer with a famously sharp pen who's tracked Nvidia for years, made of all this. Days later, he wrote a long piece. His first line set the tone. This was the first time since the AI revolution began that Jensen sat across from an interviewer who actually knows how to ask questions. All of Jensen's moves, locking the chain, the $30 billion into OpenAI, propping the neoclouds, lobbying policymakers, look like industrial strategy on the surface. Underneath, the analyst argues, Jensen is being chased by a machine. Its name, the beat and raise machine. Wall Street's relentless drumbeat to beat expectations and then beat them again. Nvidia has outrun it for 3 straight years. But when your quarterly revenue is 80-90, heading for $100 billion, beating expectations becomes a world-class problem. Every move, the analyst says, is to keep that machine from stalling on Jensen's watch. And I owe you the honest counterpoint, because this is where the bears push hardest. They watched the same interview and saw Jensen say 2 things at once. We have a decisive edge in compute, and also, China has plenty of compute. We should always be first. And also, it's fine to ship a large share of that edge abroad as long as I make more money. Those positions are in tension, and when Dwarkesh pressed the contradiction, the answer got circular. That's what Burry meant by squirming. So as we go into the most explosive part, hold both things in mind. Jensen is a genuine industry sage, and he is a salesman talking his own book. Both are true at once. Now the air in the room changed. Dwarkesh said, "This next topic, I'm not even sure I have a position on, laying down cover, but as the host, I have to ask it for the audience." Anthropic had just released a model so good at cyber attacks they were nervous to ship it. It could find thousands of high-severity vulnerabilities across major operating systems and browsers. It reportedly even surfaced a bug that had sat undiscovered for years in OpenBSD, one of the most security-hardened operating systems in the world. And it came wrapped in something called Project Glasswing with an extraordinary roster. AWS, Apple, Broadcom, Cisco, CrowdStrike, Google, JP Morgan, the Linux Foundation, Microsoft, Nvidia, essentially the entire Western cyber defense establishment in one room. So, if China can use Nvidia chips to train a model at this level, then run millions of instances to attack at once, isn't that a real threat to US national security? This is where Jensen sat up, the easy smile gone. He didn't go around it. First, he said that Anthropic model was trained on fairly mediocre compute, the kind China has everywhere. You have to face a reality. China has chips. He started doing math. China's mature process logic capacity is the largest in the world. The OECD data confirms it. China has world-class computer scientists. Most researchers in America's AI labs are of Chinese descent. They have ample power, plenty of chip, the largest pool of researchers. If you're worried about them, what actually makes the world safer? He paused. Demonizing them, forcing them into being the enemy, probably not the best answer. Dialogue at the research level might be the safest thing. And that channel, because we now treat China as an adversary, has stopped existing. Dwarkesh wouldn't let go. But China's stuck at 7 nanometer, no high-end lithography. Semi-analysis estimates their compute at about 1/10 of America's. Jensen laughed. That thinking sees the world in absolutes. AI, he said, is a 5-layer cake, and the bottom layer is power. What's America shortest of today? Also power. So Nvidia has to push the architecture to the extreme and blow tokens per watt through the roof. China has a surplus of electricity. Do you know how many ghost city data centers it has? Built, wired, sitting empty? If China wanted, it could string far more 7-nanometer chips into giant clusters. Power's not the constraint, and they make the chips themselves. Can't make the high-end chip, but string enough mid-tier chips together and you reach the same effect. Most of the world's models today were trained on Hopper. 7 nanometer is enough. The HBM bandwidth gap? Same thing, you string it. Nvidia's own NVL72 strings 72 chips into one supercomputer. China is working on silicon photonics to lash thousands together with optical fiber. And precisely because their compute is constrained, their researchers are forced into algorithmic innovation. Moore's law gives 25% a year. The Chinese teams used algorithms for a 10-fold gain. DeepSeek, he said, is not a trivial advance. Then he laid out his real worst case. The day DeepSeek launches first on a Huawei chip, that day, for America, is a disaster. Why? Every AI developer on Earth uses CUDA because the developers are many, the ecosystem rich, the install base huge. But 50% of the world's AI developers are in China. Push China to the other side, force those developers to write for a domestic architecture, and America doesn't just lose a market, it loses the single biggest block of the base that grows its ecosystem. It sounds like a future risk, but follow China's AI scene this past year and you realize it's already underway. DeepSeek, the lab that shook Silicon Valley in early 2025 with R1, went quiet for a full year after. No blockbuster, no noise. What were they doing? The watchers who know have figured it out. A wholesale migration of their underlying stack to Huawei's chips and to Huawei's CUDA equivalent software, called CAN. China has an official 5-year plan. By 2030, full independence in both chips and AI. For that, you don't just need your own chips, you need your own CUDA. And labs like DeepSeek are sent in to break the ground. How hard is that? Picture taking a programmer who's used Windows for 20 years and switching them overnight to an unfamiliar domestic OS. Every tool, library, habit from zero. DeepSeek's quiet year wasn't nothing. It was gnawing on the hardest bone there is. And here's what gives Jensen the chills. Once a top-tier lab proves you can build a frontier model completely free of CUDA, the wall he spent 20 years building has its first living proof someone can climb over. After the first, there's a second, a 10th. That's why he reaches for a word as heavy as disaster. What he fears isn't DeepSeek the model, it's that after DeepSeek, the myth of the unescalable wall has shown its first crack. Dwarkesh tried to jump in. Jensen stopped him. By your logic, he said, give China a sliver of compute and America loses everything. That extreme assumption is the naive part. My argument isn't choke them off. It's that your policy is making America voluntarily abandon the second largest market on Earth. And then he reached for history. The telecom industry, he said. Rewind to the 1980s. America's semiconductor industry was being ground into the dirt, not by who you'd guess, but by Japan. NEC, Toshiba, Hitachi, Fujitsu were beating America senseless in DRAM memory. By 1987, Japan's global DRAM share hit 80%. Intel nearly died. It had to amputate its memory business, bet the company on CPUs, and barely survived. So Washington couldn't sit still. In 1986, it signed the US-Japan Semiconductor Agreement, forced Japan to raise prices, forced open its market, hit Japanese firms with anti-dumping cases. One goal, push Japan down. And the result? Japan's DRAM was pushed down. But America's DRAM industry didn't come back either. The center of the market got shoved somewhere else entirely, to Korea. Samsung and SK Hynix, the two largest suppliers of HBM memory to Nvidia today, rose out of the rubble of that blockade. Hear the irony? America set out to suppress Japan and ended up raising Korea. The two memory suppliers Nvidia depends on most today were never supposed to exist. The blockade fed them and grew them into giants. That, Jensen says, is what he actually fears. He's seen this movie. So when Dwarkesh talks about choking off China, what comes to mind isn't a game theory model. It's 1986. Samsung, an unknown nobody just starting in DRAM. Blockade China's advanced process today, and 35 years from now, the world has 3 more Samsungs, 5 more Hynixes, and they will not thank you. They'll be the new competitors. When America ran that playbook on telecom, how'd it go? Huawei and ZTE squeezed American telecom equipment makers out of the global market one by one. Today, America uses other people's equipment for its own networks. Run it on chips, and it'll be worse. Dwarkesh tried to interject, but Tesla went into China and bred a whole crop of strong rivals, didn't it? Jensen cut him off. We're not a car. A car, BMW today, Mercedes tomorrow. No real difference. A computing system is not like that. Why did x86 lock up the PC industry for decades? Why did ARM pry open all of mobile? Because an ecosystem is sticky, and that stickiness has grown one developer habit at a time, over 10, 20, 30 years. And then came the exchange that opened this video. Dwarkesh framed it. Even if we compete with China, with Huawei, we'll lose. And Jensen, voice rising, you're not talking to a man used to losing. That loser mentality, that loser premise, I cannot accept it. America is not a loser. Our industry is not a loser. This will lose anyway, so let's give up attitude makes no sense. Dwarkesh, a little awkward, tried to cool it. Okay, let's change the subject. No, Jensen said. Don't change it. I like this topic. Keep going. If you tell all of America that AI is a nuclear bomb, that everyone should fear and hate it, are you helping America? No, you're hurting it. If you tell every young American don't study software, AI will take your job, then when it's time to hire, America can't scrape together enough engineers. 10 years ago, the doomers said exactly this. Whatever you do, don't go into radiology. AI will replace you. And what is America shortest of today? Radiologists. Life is not black and white. If we compete and lose, then we lose. But why surrender on purpose? And honestly, I think he's right about this part. Blockade-style policy historically breeds a stronger opponent. You're forcing the other side into self-reliance. Then he made a time-stamped prediction. I hope we do this again in a few years, he told Dwarkesh, when America wants to export its technology to India, the Middle East, Africa, when our country wants American technology to be the global standard. That day, I want us to sit down again, and I'll tell you at length how this policy, this failure of imagination, was what forced America to voluntarily abandon the second-largest market in the world, for no reason at all. So let me step back, because by now you can see what Jensen is actually fighting for. It is not the China orders, it is the default global standard of the AI era. Look at the shape of the last 40 years of computing. The PC era was ruled by one standard, x86 plus Windows, for more than 30 years. The mobile era by another, ARM plus iOS and Android, 15 and counting. In each era, there's a layer that becomes the default. The thing every developer, every tool, every app is built on top of, and whoever owns it collects a toll on everything for a generation. So the question for the next 20 years is simply, in the AI era, what is that layer? CUDA? The TPU? Huawei's CAN? Some Chinese stack we can't name yet? This is the single biggest open question in technology. And if China's developers, by Jensen's own count, something like half the world's total, get pushed to the other side, building their tools and ecosystem around a domestic architecture, what America loses is not an order book. It's the position of being the default standard for the next 20 years. That is Jensen's real anxiety, not this quarter's China revenue, the toll booth for the next 2 decades. And here's why he's haunted. This exact movie has already played, in full, in semiconductor history, and the company that owned the most advanced technology still lost the standard. Think about Intel. For 20 straight years, from the 90s to around 2010, Intel led the world in process technology. Its roadmap was the industry's Bible, and TSMC and Samsung had to look up at it. But Intel made one mistake. Around 2005, Apple came and asked it to build the chip for a product that hadn't launched yet. That product was the iPhone. Intel's CEO then was Paul Otellini, and in 2013, right before stepping down, he gave a 2-hour interview to The Atlantic, and there was exactly one moment where regret slipped into his voice. This was it, his words. We ended up not winning it, or passing on it, depending how you view it. And the world would have been a lot different if we'd done it. Why pass? Apple wanted a specific price, not a nickel more, and that price was below our forecasted cost. I couldn't see it. It wasn't the kind of thing you make up on volume, and the line that has to sting forever. In hindsight, the forecasted cost was wrong, and the volume was 100 times what anyone thought. He'd spent a career making decisions on gut, he said, and that one time his gut said yes, and he didn't listen. The moment Apple turned to Samsung and ARM, the standard of the entire mobile era had nothing to do with Intel, and Intel tried to fight back. Years, several generations of mobile chips, billions burned. Nobody used them. It wasn't that the chips were bad. It was that the whole mobile ecosystem, iOS, Android, every app, every toolchain, every developer habit, had already formed around ARM. Path dependence. Intel's process lead, however large, couldn't move that ecosystem an inch. Now you see why Jensen reaches for disaster. He isn't deep down debating policy with a podcaster. He's talking past the host to the policymakers on the other side of the screen. He knows this show has a large, high-end audience in both Silicon Valley and Washington, knows every sentence gets screenshotted, quoted, maybe read into a hearing. So he's not just defending himself, he's fighting for Nvidia and for America's chip industry, for a claim on the narrative of the future. And there's a layer even he leaves mostly unspoken, the one I find most telling. CUDA's dominance was never about the chip being fastest. It was 20 years of developers learning to speak one language. The asset isn't silicon, it's habit, which means CUDA can be the best stack in the world and still lose the standard, the exact way Intel's process could be the best in the world and still lose mobile, if the developers move. That's the precise nightmare the DeepSeek on Huawei scenario represents, not a faster chip, a migration of habit. Near the end, Dwarkesh finally asked a question with no gunpowder in it. Suppose the deep learning revolution had never happened. What would Nvidia be doing today? And Jensen laughed, fully relaxed for the first time. Accelerated computing, he said. We've always done this. A general-purpose CPU does a lot, but some computations it genuinely can't handle. So we fused the GPU architecture with CUDA and threw that work onto the GPU. An application could run 100, 200 times faster. Engineering. Physics, data processing, graphics. Even without AI, Nvidia would already be a very large company. And that's not a boast. Nvidia still does plenty unrelated to ChatGPT, a tool that accelerates computational lithography at the fabs, molecular dynamics simulation, drug discovery, materials design, seismic processing for oil and gas. All accelerated computing that stands on its own. So this is the line that actually defines the moat. AI is not the starting point. It's the largest gust of wind that happened to appear on a very long slope. From its founding in 1993 to today, 30 straight years, this company has done exactly one thing. Take the work general-purpose computing can't do, and build a dedicated architecture to do it. AI is just the biggest detonation it ran into along the way, which brings me back to the risk I flagged at the start. Jensen is 63. He founded Nvidia at 30. He's been CEO for 33 years, one of the rarest founder longevity records in Silicon Valley. But one day he retires, and when that day comes, will the moat still be there? Because look at what he showed in this interview. The ability to be the teacher to an entire supply chain, to walk into TSMC and argue the future into existence. That's a trust asset built over decades, and it cannot simply be handed to a successor. His personal trust capital is nearly impossible to fully transfer. But here's where he's clever. He is institutionalizing the personal moat, pouring that decades-deep understanding into the product cadence, the developer ecosystem, GTC, the supply chain relationships, the capital partnerships, writing it openly on the table, over and over. This podcast, in my view, is part of that exact project. He's not just defending himself. He's digging a deeper narrative moat, making the whole world understand how Nvidia thinks and where it's headed. That public, externalized cognition is the most precious thing he can leave whoever comes next. That's the move of a top-tier CEO. So let me leave you where that independent analyst left it. His closing judgment: on the day the party ends, on the day the law of large numbers gets too big and Nvidia can't outrun its own size, that's the day Jensen starts blaming the economy. I don't know if he's right, but it lodged one thing in my head. The invincible leather jacket Jensen we see today is built entirely on the premise that the beat and raise machine keeps running. Beat and raise. Beat and raise. The day that machine can't run anymore is the day we finally find out what kind of CEO Jensen Huang really is. Until then, watch the developers. Not the chips, not the market cap, not the quarterly beat. Watch where the world's engineers choose to write their code. Because that, not this quarter's number and not the leather jacket, is the real moat. And it's the one thing Jensen, for all his power, does not fully control. This has been how I'm thinking about it. Not financial advice, not a prediction, just the argument I think most people missed while they watched a billionaire get annoyed. The interview's still up. Go watch the whole thing and decide for yourself. I'll see you in the next one.